Welcome into the Phoenix Downbeat. I'm Drew Kreisman, along with my brother Ira Kreisman. You know us as the Everything is Final Fantasy podcast, and we are joined once again by our friend Ryan Laney of Airship Overdrive. Be sure to check out all of the awesome music that Airship Overdrive has for you right there on the YouTubes. Final Fantasy stuff, non-Final Fantasy stuff, big fan of the Castlevania stuff. Ira, I got to send you The Journey. I'm not sure you've heard his...
I heard it.
Okay, yeah.
It's fantastic. I like it a lot.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Apotheosis from Journey. That
beautiful game, beautiful soundtrack. You did a great job.
That was one of the ones that Austin Wintory himself has listened to my version of that. If you don't know, At home, he's the guy who wrote the music for Journey, and he himself gave it the stamp of approval and enthusiastic. This sounds great, which was a really nice feather in my cap when he sent that message my way.
Awesome. That's awesome. Absolutely fantastic. Hey, I'm really excited to be getting back into Overworld music and the Super Nintendo era in particular. Ira and I have talked about it before. This is when we fell in love with the franchise. This is kind of the era that introduced us to the series. It's very nostalgic for us, so I'm excited about that. I also think a lot of the 16-bit, now again, maybe it's just because it was my childhood, but has aged a bit better than some of those 8-bit chip tunes. So some of the original sound files are going to be a little nicer on our ears today.
Yeah, these are some cool songs we're going to listen to today because much like I discussed last time where I felt like Final Fantasy III was the first game where Uematsu really kind of like found his voice in making a video game soundtrack. As we listen to music from 4, 5, and 6 today, we're going to hear just further elaborations on that where, in my opinion, and listen for this at home, it sounds like 4, he was really exploring his kind of like cinematographical movie like scoring.
Yeah.
And then in 5 he started incorporating his prog rock sensibilities. He's a fan of bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And then in 6 he finally, I think, really nailed down the Nobuo Uematsu Final Fantasy sound, and we hear a lot of that in every game he works on from 6 forward. So listener, listen for that as we discuss these today, of that evolution of his style and his voice.
And with that, let us begin with the main theme, or the overworld music, for Final Fantasy IV.
How much nostalgia is baked into your two bodies when you hear that song?
Yeah. We're either down in the bedroom or I'm in my friend's basement or something, and maybe we've rented it and there's questionable piles of laundry in the corners. And yeah, that pizza might be a couple days old, but yeah, we're
Mountain Dew.
Yeah. It's it really is not even just the soundtrack, like that sound in general, the instruments, right? The synthesized instruments, the chip tunes, it all sounds very nostalgic to me.
Drew, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it really does put me into a specific place and time, and the cartridges and the tactile, the old Super Nintendo controller, and Final Fantasy 2, right?
Yeah, it was two. It was two for us.
Yeah, right. As Scott Pilgrim says in that movie, I learned the bass line from Final Fantasy 2. He's talking about this one. But it's, yeah.
Yeah, this is a good one, and as you can tell from that really heavy like drum part and a slightly more emphasized bass part. Speaking of the bass parts in this one, we hear that evolution of Uematsu's style here. And for the listener at home, because we have a lot of songs we're going to go through today, because the three games we're discussing don't have just one overworld theme each. But this one's got a cool motif where there's your main melody, but there's constantly, almost constantly, this secondary string line in the background where you'll hear like a really long sustained note in the main melody, and in the background you hear this da 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 da. What do you guys think that might represent in the story of Final Fantasy IV?
Ooh.
Well, we do have two worlds.
There's
In fact,
two worlds.
we did a whole podcast episode 100 years ago about the allegory of the cave and the two worlds, and how that can be a metaphor for you don't know what you don't know, and I think that's part of it. It's also, for me, this one is, I talked about last time we did overworld themes that 2 felt much darker given the imperial gates of hell opening up, and 3 felt more mysterious. And this one feels like a blending of those two to me, because we've got the Empire, which we are in Final Fantasy IV,
Right.
but you've also got the mystery of, I mean, there's an underworld and a Fey March and possibly a moon to go to.
Yeah, so we've already got one of the larger scale things, which is like there's two worlds that you explore here. But there's also something even like another kind of two sides of something that you see much earlier and kind of middle way into the game. What would that thing be?
If I maybe I'm not going with this where you're thinking of, but you've got the big war story and then you've got the big love story, right? So those are kind of the two main running themes. So I don't know if that's where we're going with this.
It's not where I was going, but that's actually perfect, because it's just further emphasizing this concept of like dichotomies are at play through a lot of this game in particular.
Yeah.
Compared to the first ones, like 1, 2, and 3 especially. But there's also in Final Fantasy IV, there's the whole like Cecil, Kain, Dark Paladin, Light Paladin, or Dark Knight, Light Paladin type dichotomy going back and forth. That's the one, when I think of Final Fantasy IV, I always think of the Cecil, and Kain kind of transformation going on. And this game does a great job in the overworld music, where we hear this back and forth constantly. Other games will have similar ones, a little counter melody here and there, but in this one, it just holds through pretty consistently in the entire overworld theme. And we're kind of forcing ourselves to not go into some other quote unquote overworld themes today, because we have so many to get through. But there are other quote unquote overworld themes. We're trying to limit ourselves today to ones that are like, all right, just the main map that you explore for most of the game, that are like under normal circumstances as you're venturing across that overworld. But there are other ones that you can think of if you've played through the game before. But it's just great. And then we hear again that kind of like rock sensibility coming in at the very start. There's this drum set part, and it just keeps going. And as we get to 5 here in a little bit, we're going to hear that emphasized even more so. This melody in this song, it starts off with one of my favorite terms I always use, is one of the happy sad chords, or the sad happy chord. In this case, it's an A, outlines an A minor 7 chord. And just those 4 notes, it gives you one of those jazzy 7 chords, where half of it, if you just isolate it, it makes, in this case, minor. And if you isolate the top 3 notes, it's a major chord. Which, wouldn't you know it, also plays into that great theme of dichotomies, of light things happening and dark things happening at the same time throughout the entire game. There's also a spot. Oh, before you queue up the next one, Drew, go back real quick to the other one. Did you guys notice a little kind of callback that Uematsu does to one of his own very well-known pieces about a third of the way through this one?
I think I know what you're getting at here.
What do you hear?
He gives us prelude arpeggio on the xylophone thing that sort of starts us with our main thing. It kind of evolves suddenly into this.
Yep, Drew heard it. Spot on. That's what I was going to say, is that he snuck the prelude arpeggios in there. They're not exactly note for note what you hear in the regular prelude, but they're adapted for this version. And it's so clever because at the start, you do hear these and they kind of keep going in the background, but they're not the prelude version. And then around the B theme of this one, we suddenly hear a really, really, really strong, hey, it's the prelude quote come in that background, that kind of like xylophone-y, synth harpy, pizzicato string, whatever that effect sort of sound is. But it's a great overworld theme. It's one that I think it presents this motif of pushing forward. There's always this progress, but it has those two back and forth things going on and on. And now that I think about it, actually, I'm just now realizing this. I wonder if that harpy arpeggio sound was supposed to kind of be like a foreshadowing for going to the moon, where we have this sort of like up and down, like heavy rising action to be like, yo, you're gonna rise even more than you think you might in this game when you get to that really bizarre final act.
Oh, I love that. We're always here for insisting that Final Fantasy has actually foreshadowed its completely out of nowhere's absolute bananas nonsense plot twist. It's like, no. They said at the beginning there was going to be a cloud of darkness. We just didn't know. That's
Except for Necron.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Everything but Necron was foreshadowed. But
it's funny you say that. I just listened to the folks over at the Resident Arc podcast. They're they just wrapped up their Final Fantasy IX one, and they have an argument that Necron was foreshadowed. Nice. And I can see their line of thinking, and they do great stuff over there. Yeah. But I'm also kind of like, but was it? Like, there's some real hairs to pull if you're gonna argue it. But they do a good job of it.
So, as we've done before, I wanted to bring up one of our favorite specialty albums from Square, then Squaresoft. These, overseen by Nobuo Uematsu. He didn't oftentimes do very much of the arranging, maybe some. This album is called Celtic Moon, Final Fantasy IV. It features 15 tracks from this game done in a Celtic style. Mostly by this singer and violin or fiddle player, whose name I'm going to do my absolute best at. I had to look this up. It's spelled Maire is her first name. It's Gaelic or Gaelic. And it's supposed to be pronounced, I think, close to Myra. It's anglicized to Moira more often than not. Her last name is Breatnach, or it's spelled Breatnach. And I'm really glad I looked her up because we've been listening to this, Ira, for 25 years plus. And this is another one you found in the back of a magazine, I think, somewhere.
Yeah. I think last time I said Nintendo Power, but after I was thinking about it later, probably EGM.
Okay, that makes sense. Someone was going to correct us on that. Someone out there was going to say, no. But I wanted to play a bit of this, and I'm going to start us a little bit into it right before its first loop. It redoes the melody again, and I wanted to get to that point because I think that's where it really turns up the Celtic flair and adds a couple of these extra elements and flourishes that'll be fun to listen to and talk about.
I paused because Ira was like singing to himself, but he was muted, so I didn't know if he was trying to sing to the camera or not.
I mute myself so that my general aptitude for speaking up when I ought not.
It's a podcast.
You guys can cut me off whenever you want. By the way, if you have a question or something, I mean, feel free. This piece here, I just had a visceral flashback to playing Final Fantasy VIII for the first time and making Zell do the tap dance part when you make a little band form together. I had no clue what was going on in that scene, so it was like Zell tap dancing, Selphie playing rock guitar, Quistis doing some other thing that made no sense, and because I didn't know that there were two like groups you could make with what they gave you, and I was like, what is this? And then I just kept going, all right, whatever, let's get across the horizon.
Oh yeah, that's funny. I do love the added clickety clackities that make it extra Celtic, and the that fiddle playing is really a whole lot of fun. All those extra little flourishes to keep adding, and right after you said it, now I'm hearing obviously that she's doing all the really intense movement and she's keeping everything going at a very quick pace as that flute is doing the long notes over the top of it, doing the dichotomy that you just laid out for us.
Yeah.
But I've always really enjoyed that particular rendition of that piece, so I'm glad I got to share it with everybody today.
So Ryan, you're a percussionist, right? And
I am.
So when I was in band 100 years ago, I always felt bad for the instruments that could go 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and it forever. Because I sure as hell couldn't do that on a euphonium. And I could never understand how the flautists and the percussionists could keep that going forever. In a piece like this, in the original piece when it's more 1E and a 2E and then in this one it's more da 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 da. Is that something that you feel like you can sustain, or does it have to be on a soundtrack like this where you can program it in?
So for this one that I'm hearing here, it sounds like the xylophone type effect they're playing. I'm pretty sure that's a programmed, computerized something in the background because it's just too consistent. Like it's too perfect from front to back. And I was actually listening for that and just kind of being like, whoa, someone is actually like really, really good on this. But I think it's something programmed in. It depends on what you're talking about. If it's either like a snare drum or something that you would hear like in a Celtic bar, like spoons or a bodhran, which is just like a single spot you're playing on, that I could play 16th notes or swing triplet 16th notes for days and never get tired really for hours and upon hours if I had to. But if you're playing like on a xylophone where you're going up and down, it can be mentally fatiguing more so than physically because your eyes kind of glaze over eventually. You start to kind of lose track of where you are because you're just going up and down and up and down. And unlike most instruments, like for example, a flute or a baritone or a violin, percussion is interesting because most percussion instruments, you don't actually touch them with your own hands. There's an intermediary between you and the rest of it. So if you go to a piano, I could play arpeggios for days and never get tired because I can feel where I am and I don't have to look at what I'm doing. But on a xylophone or a marimba, vibraphone, it's way more draining by comparison to do constant 30-second notes, 16th notes, or whatever, up and down in scales or in some sort of melody of some kind. But if it's a single type thing, pretty straightforward. And for any of like the flautists at home who can double tongue, trumpet players who can double tongue, that kind of gets into its own world of other stuff.
Metal bass drummers who can double bass all day. I'm like, how are you not tired? I'm tired. Just listening to you, I'm tired.
I've tried double bass exactly 3 times in my life, and every time I was just like, nope, nope, I'm never gonna need to use this. I'm done. I'm good.
Yeah. I'm all right. Okay, if we are ready to move on to Final Fantasy V, I have a little bit of a curveball for us. Actually, before we do, I want to mention also, before I forget, that Moira Briknak, also worked with Yasunori Mitsuda on a Xenogears album.
No way.
Creed, Creid. I spent most of the morning listening to it. It's fantastic.
Ooh, put a link in the description on this video because I want to listen to that.
Yeah, I could even, if we have time to circle back to it at the end, I could play you a little clip of my favorite song on it so far. But speaking of specialty albums, because we already did a little bit of a Head on Our Way, when we talked about intro music, it was Ira's choice. I wanted to play a version we haven't heard yet, but one that is on a specialty album we actually did not have when we were kids. And so when I listened to this as an adult, this album kind of took me generally by surprise. It's just called Dear Friends, by the way, which is just one of the pieces from Final Fantasy V. Mm-hmm. You might think, okay, it's going to be a fairly standard, they just put it on Real Instruments album. It's a pretty wild album to go and listen to. I'll talk a little bit about it, and you'll hear what I mean right away. The beginning is not going to be what you're expecting, unless you've heard this before. I promise I did not click on the wrong piece of music.
Is this a headphone user's warning? Should I?
It shouldn't be too loud, but it's going to be unusual.
Wow. This is the end of every dark fantasy kids movie from the 80s that ends riding a dragon. This is, never-ending story and all that stuff. I love it. It feels like a sort of a rock version of a fantasy. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of.
Yeah. So I like that. I have heard that album. I just forgotten about it.
Same. I've heard that in brief snippets. I haven't heard that song from it, but the minute it started playing, I was like, "This sounds familiar. I've heard something else on this album before." Yeah,
it's the first sentence. I promise this is related. Of George Orwell's 1984 is. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clock was striking 13. That phrase, bright, cold, always really stuck with me. And I think that album is very bright, cold. I think of it as like cold island or Scandinavian music. There's a lot of concertinas and accordions and harpsichords, and it's very bright, but without being in many ways warm very often. Mm-hmm. It's really even that like trumpet sound. It's sort of that darker. Yeah, it's very, very interesting album. Not every piece on it is a hit with me the way Celtic Moon and Prey, the other ones we've talked about, are. But it's, if you like that kind of music, I highly recommend it.
Someday we'll definitely do a couple discussions about icy, snowy areas in Final Fantasy games, because there is an art to making that kind of music, like Drew was just discussing, of bright yet cold.
Yeah. And since Ira brought it up, I wanted to read something. And I think, Ryan, you may have mentioned this a week or so ago, though I can't remember if it was when we were recording. And somebody sent this to us after we had our conversation about this piece last time, talking about Indiana Jones. Mm-hmm. Ratatouille on Blue Sky said, Final Fantasy V seems to draw a lot of inspiration from 80s adventure movies like Indiana Jones and The Neverending Story. Bastion's Happy Flight, in particular, sounds like the wellspring of every early Final Fantasy airship theme.
And I'll even go farther, because if it's the song I'm thinking that it is, I'm pretty sure it is. It's specifically, to me, it sounds like Final Fantasy VIII's airship theme very closely. I think it's called Ride On is what the 8 airship theme is when you fly the Ragnarok. And this, even the intro sounds almost one-to-one, a similar construction. And then the main part that it jumps into sounds very similar in construction. And if we hadn't brought it up here, when we eventually do airship themes someday, I know we're going to bring this one back.
I mean, Neverending Story has one of the most traumatic scenes in all of children's cinema. And so you need that at the end. Final Fantasy does that also. Like, we're going to go through some trauma, and by the time we get to the end, it's nice to have an airship theme, I guess, to relax to.
Yeah. Chrono Trigger puts that flying through the sky on the saxophone. It's maybe going to be okay at the end of the world piece that I just love, right? Like, yeah, but that I had been so long since I had listened to Neverending Story that when I brought that up, I was like, oh, they're right. This Ratatouille person is 100% right on the money with this. And a lot of these airship or even some of these overworld themes strike that tone.
But going on, what else do we have from 5 we're going to talk about today?
then something bad happens, like Ira mentioned.
So in the game, and you guys have, I'm sure, played 5 and more familiar with it than I am. What happens around the time that we shift from the ba da 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 into this theme called A New World?
So 1,000 years ago,
uh,
the,
A
the
tree.
people at the time split the world into two to create the interdimensional rift to stop the void, or to like hold the void. Now, I'm actually not sure if this is the overworld theme of when the worlds are back together, or if this is the overworld theme from the other world. Uh,
I think it's the other world. I believe the ones from when they're back together is the next one we're going to listen to.
okay.
I could be getting it backwards. Someone will correct us. Please do. It's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Anyway, I'm pretty sure this is the one where they're merged back together. And the reason I think that is because it is the more oppressive one. It's the sadder one. Whereas the other one just feels different, right? So in the world, so remember in Final Fantasy V, the Warriors of Dawn came to the other half of the world, the other world, in order to trap Exdeath, and then they all went home except for Bart's dad. So the world of Bart's and Lena and Ferris is the world of adventure because things are happening, whereas the other world is a little more uh, peaceful in a way. So I think this is the one where they're merged because it's a little sadder.
Darker and sadder.
Like
Yeah.
the bad thing has happened. Not quite Final Fantasy VI bad, but the bad thing has happened, and we have to gather our family and go stop the bad thing.
Yeah, that's the simplest way you can describe it, is the bad thing happened. And you can tell pretty much right away something bad has happened here. And for you, again, asking kind of Drew and Ira as like the quote unquote non-musicians in the room, even though they'd certainly have some musical backgrounds, what immediately gives you the impression of, like, if you were to hear this by itself, oh, wow, something bad has happened. We are in an unfortunate time with whatever's going on here. How does the music convey that?
Yeah, I think the melody is just a little. Those little soft bells are gentler, sadder type of thing. The falling bass line, is very kind of dragging along, and it just feels generally darker in tone, slower. The movement of the drums are gone, or if there are any drums, it's just those bum 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 bum, as opposed to the main theme, right, which has the boom boom, all that going on. Yeah, we're going.
Yeah, and Drew's hitting it out of the park on this one because it's all those exact things. The tempo is slower. It's only about 100 beats per minute, somewhere in that range, compared to the very upbeat that we get from the regular main theme. We have a more, I would call it like sadder, more reserved bass line. It's not as boom 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 boom. It's just kind of boom 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 boom, and it's very much like sad, like just straight up. It's not as energetic. It's lethargic. It's melancholic in some way. And then the melody itself also, it just from the very beginning, it outlines a minor setting. It is in a minor key. It's in C minor for the vast majority of this. And you put all those things together, and without having to really make a super complicated melody, it does kind of draw a little bit from the regular main theme of 5, but not as one-to-one as Uematsu's other stuff does. If you listen to them back to back, you'll hear some similarities, but it just sounds sadder. The bad thing happened, as Ira was saying. And you can also, I don't know if you guys caught this, but in the second part, in the B theme, Uematsu does a callback to another Overworld theme that we've talked about in the last Overworld episode. Did either of you catch that? Does this little part sound familiar?
Oh.
Do you remember what that was from?
But that's Promised Land. That's 2, right?
Yeah, 2. Final Fantasy 2, the proper Final Fantasy 2. It has this bass line that does the same thing that the banjo, I think, in this one does in the B theme. If you listen back to it, you'll hear it again. And it doesn't move the same way, but it's very clearly like, oh, I'm going to make a sad overworld theme. Here's one I did earlier. I'm going to call back my own work.
Awesome. I also want to mention that this particular piece gives me monster Studio Ghibli vibes. It really feels Joe Hisaishi to me. And though the piece I'm going to play is different in tone, I think it's similar in structure. And I actually think that the piece it's closest to is the same one that I played from Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind last time we talked about this. It's very close to that piece. But I wanted to play something different.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
If you had to give a term for like that first part where there's like these, I don't want to use any adjectives on it, but
flowery, floofy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, what you just said, that first word, flowery, is really close to a term that musicians will use, which is pastoral or pastoral, which is to give this sensation that you're in this big, flowing, verdant meadow, and there's wind and blossoms and flowers all around you. Can you play that part real quick, just like those first 4 or 5 seconds of that? Yeah, it gives you this sense where you can't really tell an exact key center that you're in. It just kind of sounds like it's all these different key or tonal centers swirling around you, but not in a bad, chaotic way. I don't know exactly how this is constructed here, but it sounds like it's very heavily in a pentatonic scale, maybe slightly more 7-note scale, but it's just kind of like clustered together in a way that impressionist music does. And it just gives that fantastic sense that you are somewhere safe, and yet there is energy all around you at the same time. It's just such a great like just sound and feeling when a composer can put that into their music so successfully, like someone like Hisaishi can do.
Yeah. He's so good. I'm not sure I said the name of the piece, by the way. That was Path of Wind from My Neighbor Totoro.
Totoro.
That is my wife's favorite Studio Ghibli film. She loves it. We just watched it this morning with my son. It's so good. Yeah.
Roll call. What's everyone's favorite Ghibli film here?
Nausicaa.
Oh, the favorites are tough, man.
He doesn't like to pick favorites or rank things.
While Ira thinks about his, mine is one I don't think anyone else I've ever met has. It's The Cat Returns, because it plays into one of my favorite storyline tropes, which is the fish out of water trope. I won't spoil it, but if anyone at home is looking for a good kind of like jolly, lighthearted, late 80s style movie, check out The Cat Returns. It's not discussed very much, but I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's not that I don't choose favorites, it's that I tend not to have them because I tend to think about art in terms of difference of kind rather than difference of degree. So that said, Porco Rosso is a fantastic hero. When Marnie was there, I can barely think about without crying. I really like the lesson learned by Chihiro in Spirited Away. And much more dissembling about how I can't choose favorites.
Spoken like a true scholar.
Love it. His actual answer is Castle in the Sky. That's the one that he's watched the most. That's the real tell. It's like with music. You don't want to pick favorites, but what's the one you keep putting on over and over again? But no, they're all so incredible. And I also love the way that I think those early Studio Ghibli films, the 80s and 90s ones, I've got other Studio Ghibli music in mind for when we get to the late 90s Final Fantasy games. And I love the way these kind of mirror each other. I think it's not on accident. I can't imagine Uematsu wasn't watching those films and listening to that music and somewhat inspired by it as well.
For sure.
And now let's listen to our last piece from Final Fantasy V, titled The Unknown Lands.
So immediately, how can you tell that this song came from the same game as the last two songs of Final Fantasy V we just listened to?
Oh, that's a great question.
Who's throwing the curveballs now? Yeah.
Yeah. I
No,
don't know.
but
I
really,
feel
does
it in my
anything jump
bones.
out that makes you think like that?
Yeah.
If you listen to this, you could go, "Oh, here are the things that tell me this is the same game."
The drum sounds are very similar. I feel like those have a similar vibe to them, but and maybe some of that arpeggiated harp thing in the background that's been there, right? Maybe that's our key
Yep, that's one of the
character.
big ones. We hear that
Okay.
harp arpeggio happening again that we've heard in both of the overworld themes in
Mm.
five so far.
That flute sound is similar. Is it more or less that same flute is always there? I think.
I'd have to listen back to the original
Yeah.
versions, but there's like that same sound, what they call a sound font, which is like similar instrumentation going
Okay.
on. The drums, the harps, that flute sound we've heard before. And there's
Yeah.
something also in just the melody straight up. Because
Right.
if you listen to the melody of like the original theme, which kind of has this sort of vibe going for it, that concept of the high note and then the lower notes going up keeps coming back. And it was actually in the other song, a New World as well. This one starts with the low notes going up and then jumps to a high note. But then it falls down chromatically, which makes it sound sad.
Yeah.
And all of those like falling apart things. In our last episode on Overworlds, we talked a little bit about or not Overworlds, on Ilya's theme, about how one of the songs or reharmonizations I played, Ira said it sounds like you're going into the basement bar down the steps. And there was a reason why it sounded like things were going down. They were falling down in some way from what the music was doing. And this does the same thing. We're taking elements of Five's normal overworld theme or main theme, and now we're putting it in minor. We're adding descending chromaticism to it, and it just generally sounds sadder. Something else that one does really well. Oh, Drew, you did it again. You jumped ahead. I want to go back once more. Real quick, play the start of it, and I want you to listen to something very particular that the drum part does that we haven't heard yet in the other ones, and how that might correlate to the overall tone in a very literal, like, this is what it might sound like in real life sort of thing. In this sense here, we're going to hear something in the very sparse percussion drum part that I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I heard it that time.
What'd you hear? What does it do?
That echoing drum when it hits and it just sort of pop, pop, pop.
Yeah, we hear not only in the very beginning the harp arpeggios, they fade away, but also that snare drum part has this echoey reverberation to it. Bah, bah, bah. So if you were to put it in real life, where would you hear something echo like that? And don't think about like in a city park or something, like literally just what would the physical,
like in a cave.
Yeah, a cave, a canyon, an open hall with nobody walking in it, somewhere that is what?
Open,
and I would say empty, something where it's empty and desolate.
Yeah.
And so that plays into what's happening in the game. If there's this sense of desolation or a sense of like, where can I find something, having that literal pa, 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 that sort of echoey sound is a great way to make the listener think, oh, I'm somewhere desolate. I'm somewhere where there's either not a lot of support, there's not a lot of assistance or help or friends or whatever, and I'm kind of alone. And spoiler alert, we're going to hear something very similar to that in Final Fantasy VI music in a little bit. But I just wanted to point that out, what a cool thing it does. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out on this song that's so cool is Uematsu makes a really great use of the Lydian mode, quote unquote, when he works the melody around into this low C note. He overlays it onto a G flat major chord, which gives us the Lydian sound, which by default has this very like like strenuous reaching sort of sound, as though that top note, the C, wants to continue up and resolve onto D flat.
Sounds
And
like
that
Final Fantasy 6 to me.
It kind of does. And so pulling that note, if we stopped it there, it would resolve, but he continues the strain by having it instead resolve to a middle note of the arpeggio. So it's not quite resolved yet. You know that you're not in the home base just yet. There's something more to do. And since this is the song that's going to be playing as you're approaching that end game, it makes sense that he would start one of the melody lines with literally a Lydian sound that sounds like you're straining and reaching for something. So cool. So well done.
That's amazing. You also reminded me when you were talking about the percussion of when we did the Final Fantasy 12 conversation for the downtown music, and we mentioned the kind of sounding of the banging on like a barrel or something, or a more echoey type of sound, and we mentioned Chrono Trigger end of the world music. So I think that's an interesting way of tying all of those different things together. You've got sort of end of the world, but also tactile, just banging on equipment that's kind of around, and now it's echoing in the end of time and the end of space.
Spoiler alert, I'm also going to mention a Chrono Trigger song when we talk about Final Fantasy VI.
Speaking of Final Fantasy VI, let's get to that and listen to one of the greatest pieces of music that's ever been written.
One of the greatest Final Fantasy pieces and one of the greatest video game pieces ever made. Right there, folks. Terra's theme, Overworld theme from Final Fantasy VI.
Hey, it's... I've been waiting a very long time to ask a real musician this question. Why is that so good?
I have my theory. A lot of it, though, I think really does come from that kind of like that undefinable just element it has. There's something about it that just resonates with people. And I've played this song a lot. I've actually arranged full band versions of this piece before, for like a full concert band before. And there's something about it that I can't quite put my finger on. I just know it's good. You know, and I can break it down a little bit here, like from a theory perspective of the great things it does, but there's just something about it that's just fantastic. Oh, funny enough, random, I just noticed I have my little Terra perler on my desk right now. I just realized.
Fantastic.
I love it.
Good.
So anyways, here are a few of the simple things it does. First of all, our main theme, which I think we're in G sharp minor for a lot of this melody, and it's just pretty straightforward. It outlines our 1s, 3s, and 5s very, 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 very much throughout it. There's not a whole lot really going on, to be honest. It's just very well written to be sort of not exciting, but still moving forward. And then we simply, in the second part, we just simply shift it up to the relative major, which would be, in this case, B major. And it's the exact same melody. Like if you literally go to a keyboard and you just keep all the same notes, diatonic is the word I always love using, and you use all the diatonic notes for G sharp minor, they're the same notes as B major. That's why they're called the relative major, relative minor to each other, because they're the same 7 or 8 notes. And so we're just taking that same melody and just shifting it up by 2 diatonically on our keyboard. And it's the same thing. So first of all, it simply draws your ear very easily because it's using the same motif in a minor, like a very blatantly minor setting, and then a blatantly major setting. The second part of why I think this works so incredibly, actually, I'm going to say second of 3 of my main points on this one. The second one is that it starts off with a very thin texture. All we really hear is some light percussion, that bass part, that kind of like weird, like wop, 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 wop. I can't even like describe what instrument that is. It just sounds like generic future sounding instrument, right? And then a flute. And maybe there's like some light dun 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 dun, like a light guitar, right?
Yeah.
But if you take away that, like a lot of that background stuff, the main 2 things we hear is percussion and flute. Like that's by far like the leading voices here, right? So if you hear that, and I'm going to ask, us as living in America, in the United States of America, if you were to hear drum and flute, what does that make you think of almost immediately?
It's fifes and drums. That's the American Revolution.
Yeah.
That's
For us here in America, that's American Revolution instruments. It's a fife and drum, or pipe and drum, or drum and flute. There's different versions of this. But basically, you'd march into war with one person playing a sling drum and one person playing a flute or a piccolo or some other sort of, flute. I'm just going to say flute instrument. And that's not just unique to us here in America either. If you go back to parts of Asia, they had their versions of a drum and a high-pitched woodwind instrument. If you go to parts of Europe, they had their versions of a drum and a pipe or woodwind instrument for going into war with. And it's something that it works across many, many cultures in the world. Do you guys have any guesses of why, perhaps in, hundreds of years ago, why a drum and a flute might have been the first 2 things that you gravitate toward if you need a marching military musician corps?
I suppose they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum and they would pierce through a lot of sound, right? Like, so a drum is going to create a very low, very guttural, like in the ground, feel it in your bones, feel it in your chest, feel the heartbeat, versus that high flute, which should just be able to sort of pierce through a lot of other noise, right? A lot of times in a big orchestra, when you've got 100 instruments, you can still hear that one high piccolo just way up there doing their thing because they exist at the top of the pyramid of sound, right?
Yeah, Drew's hitting it. A drum of some kind to hit that low and literally marching, pulse to keep people in step or to give commands. There are documents for either things in Europe, or the ones I'm primarily familiar with, or in Asia, where the drums would literally be used to give a command to people far farther away than you could call something with a human voice, right? So it was for communication as well, and of course a flute in a very high piercing range. It can cut through whatever's happening. Typically, from my knowledge, it would just be for playing actual melodies to kind of boost morale of the troops. But it could also have been used for communication. I don't know top of my head any instances of this, but
signal retreat with it. I in the movies, at least, I don't know if that's real, but I've definitely seen movies where they start playing a different tune on the flute so everybody knows to hightail it out of there.
It very well could be. So you've got those aspects, and there's a third aspect that you might be overlooking, and I'll give you a hint. The flutes that they would have used in these times, generally speaking, would not have been like a flute you see in an orchestra or in a concert band today. Can you think of structurally how they would be different?
Well, there's no keys on the old ones.
Yes, Iris got it right there. The old ones generally didn't have moving keys. So if there are no moving parts on it, why is that a better instrument to take into the field?
Oh, this is not going to break nearly as easily and all the nonsense you're going to be getting up to.
You can make
Precisely.
one out there too.
Yeah, and that's why something like a
Right.
bugle would also be used, because a bugle, compared to a trumpet
One.
properly, has no moving parts. It's literally just a mouthpiece and then some form of a cylinder or a cone bent into a bell shape, and then you play out of that, but it's easy to maintain. And so if you go out into the field and it gets dinged up a little bit and gets battered around, it will likely still play. It will still serve its purpose from a very utilitarian standpoint. So redirecting those three reasons back to Final Fantasy VI now, why might Uematsu have chosen a drum and a flute to be the primary instruments to start this piece?
Well, for one thing, it's a march on Narsh. Like the very first thing that happens is the Empire is marching upon the Frozen Esper. But there's also sort of the way this is put together. It's again that the combination of the Empire is coming, but we got a little bit of hope. The person who was part of the Empire, if it's Cecil or Terra, is also our hope to move past the Empire, and so they've got to find it within themselves, either to become a paladin or an esper, I guess.
Yeah, and Ira's hitting on all the big points here. Is if we're starting off the game, which by the way is also one of the greatest intros in all of gaming, is those Magitech armors marching across the snowy wastes, is we start off with Terra kind of being alone. They refer to her as just like, oh, she's just the girl. Oh yeah, she has like the mind control slave crown on her, but she's just the girl. Just don't upset her, don't take the crown off, and we'll be fine. She's very much alone, and for various reasons later in the game we learn more aspects of her aloneness, and I think loneliness or isolation plays its part in several ways in this game. I'm not going to dive into it too much here, but that flute, I think it really personifies Terra. It's also Terra's theme, as being alone. It's being played on one instrument. But then once we jump to the major version of this, we suddenly hear a full string consort come behind it, as though she has done what?
She's gathered
She
friends.
found friends. There are
Yes.
more people. It's not Terra by herself. We've gone from the minor, sad, loneliness version where it's just on Terra by herself, the flute representing Terra. But now we're looking at the full version where it's, we have the whole group of people. We have Celes, we have Locke, we have, et cetera, et cetera. And we're all working together for a better cause. Now here's Terra's melody in major. And as it keeps on going, we hear the theme kind of goes away. We don't hear the da 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 anymore. We now hear these big, just gorgeous sweeping chords. Bum 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 bum. And it no longer is about Terra. It's now about the group coming together to serve a purpose. And the game itself, it kind of does that, where it starts off as being literally just Terra as far as main characters that we see. Then we get a few more characters, and by the end, it's not really Terra's story anymore. We often hear in Final Fantasy terms, who's the main character of 6, and people argue one way or another of who they think, quote, the main character is. I'm in the camp that there isn't one. Terra is the closest thing we get to a main character in it, but you could argue it's Celes, you could argue it's other people. But in this case, we get to the point where in the latter part of the game, it's no longer about Terra, and it's about the group coming together to serve some final purpose. And the music does that fantastically well, because it goes from Terra's theme by itself on one instrument to then Terra's theme in a major key in a full consort into, hey, Terra's theme, we're not going to hear you anymore. It's now about everyone coming together. It's yet again, Uematsu foreshadowed the entire, not maybe the entire storyline, but he foreshadowed the general arc of Terra's storyline, at least, right from the get-go as the very first song you hear. It's so good.
We haven't said genius yet this show, so the people out there sober listening.
Who wants the genius?
And I think to that point, this is the first overworld theme that is also a main character's theme. We talked about how Final Fantasy V was weird and different because it was the intro. You start with it before you've pressed any buttons, and then it plays again when you get back to the overworld, right? Fours is a little more traditional, where it's the overworld music. It plays when you hit the overworld. It serves that purpose. This one's interesting because, and this is my way of saying this to anyone wondering, you guys don't have enough time to talk about all of the other Terra stuff. Dear listener, one day, I promise you, we will do a deeper dive, because this theme gets leitmotifed all over this game, reinterpreted so many times in so many interesting ways. I think it's probably the biggest argument in her favor of being the main character, which is that her music runs throughout the course of all of it. And I can hear someone say, like, Celeste's main theme, they built a whole opera around. All right, fine. You know what? Again, there's a lot of different opinions out there. I think it's fascinating, but I do think, as far as other interpretations and even outside of the game itself, we're gonna have to come back to Terra's theme at some point in the future.
And I'm going to save most of this for when we discuss her theme more in depth sometime down the road. But when her theme shifts to major, does this part sound familiar at all?
Yes. Yeah. It's Eyes on Me.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah. Oh man, he's so good at everything all the time. To counter the point I was just making, though, and really reaffirm your point about how by the end of the story, it's not really so much about here. Okay, we've gone a little while and we haven't spoiled anything. I'm going to go ahead and issue a spoiler warning right now, because I don't think we can really do justice to these last two pieces of music.
Yeah.
Without just talking about what happens, right? So we're going to talk about two more pieces of overworld music from Final Fantasy VI, because in the middle of the game, a psycho-fascist, nihilistic clown of God and magic, I didn't quite get that in the right order, but I'm leaving it, destroys the world. And so we can't be marching along with our happy little flute and our drum pushing us into action to defeat the Empire, because the Empire was taken over by this guy, and now he sits atop his ivory tower with his bolt of judgment and can kill people from anywhere in the world. Like, we talk about living in dark times. We said about Final Fantasy V, like, the bad thing happened. No. Here, the bad thing happened.
The bad thing. And for listeners at home, as we listen to this one, it's just called Dark World from Final Fantasy VI. Listen for similar things we discussed about when we listened to the New World, Unknown Lands stuff about isolation when we listen to this one, because you're going to hear some of those concepts brought back musically. What do we hear?
Jeez, that's oppressive.
It is, but why is it oppressive? Why is Uematsu making this music alone sound oppressive?
Well, we've gone back to the wind at the beginning of the game, so we're bringing that sound effect back in. I don't know. Do you consider? I remember when I was in high school buying these albums where they would have the river in the background or birds chirping. Do you consider that an instrument?
that's a whole nother discussion on its own that our good friend John Cage could certainly weigh in on. Yeah, it depends on how you define an instrument, right? Versus just a sound versus what is music versus not music. As long as it's serving whatever your purpose is and it's a sound, I argue it's music in some way or another. And like Ira just said, first thing we hear is wind, and it's almost the same wind setting that we hear in Chrono Trigger. Do you guys remember which setting we hear that wind, that almost that exact same wind effect in?
Also at the end of that world, right? In the whatever number, I'm gonna get it wrong. 2600 AD, whatever it is. Yeah,
it's like 2300, 2400, whatever that future time is, where it's like desolation, there's no food, everyone's being sustained by the, what's it called, like the energetic. Yes. Yeah, but exactly. But there's still, your HP and MP is fully restored, but you're still hungry.
So dark.
and you hear this almost the exact same. I listened to them back to back in preparation for this episode. They're almost the exact same wind. It sounds, again, open, desolate. You are at nature's mercy for whatever's going on. Why else does it sound oppressive and just stark and dangerous?
There's just those not marching like with the drum. There's just those stomping organ chords, right? It's just bomb, 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 bomb. Like it's very like clomping along. The exact opposite of the Final Fantasy IV music that was like this is like
and funny enough, it's also like, yes, those chords are very foreboding, and partially because of just the chords they are playing. For those of you at home, if you want to play these, it's basically outlining a first inversion B minor chord. And whenever you play a minor chord in first inversion, which is basically having the relative major in the bass of it, it just sounds wrong. If I play a B minor chord here on my little organ setting, I've got B in the bass, but if I put that B in the top and have D in the bass instead, it just sounds slightly off. And what he's doing here is he's first outlining not even a regular chord at all. He's outlining a D, F sharp, C sharp, which immediately has that major 7 thing. On other instruments it might work, but on an organ where you have multiple levels of harmonics coming out at the same time, by default it's going to make it way crunchier, and then it's just this descending line that eventually gets to an augmented chord. And that one right there, I see Drew's face on the webcam just wincing because it's not good at all. If you had that same sort of like quote unquote foreboding tempo, but it was all like major happy stuff like this.
Oh, Ryan. Okay, the shoe is on the other foot. Normally I unknowingly set you up for things. You have unknowingly set me up for something here.
First time. Nice.
When I first heard this piece of music as a kid, I didn't like it for 2 reasons. One, it was a little too oppressive for me, and I wanted my happy Terra music back. And 2, because it sounded almost exactly like something else I had heard that's very super cheesy. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you The Young and the Restless.
Listeners, you got to find the video of this. It is the epitome of like late 80s, early 90s cheesy, like not CGI, but like camera transition graphics.
Oh,
tell us, what is the Young and the Restless? What actually is it?
It is what was it? A daytime soap opera? One of those, Days of Our Lives and those kinds of things. And I don't know why, but it was one of, when I was a kid, darn it, we didn't have cable. We had 4 channels. And when you were sick from school, you watched Price is Right and then whatever else was on TV. And sometimes it would be this nonsense. And so I was familiar with this piece of music. And while it's not exactly the same, as you can hear, those chords right at the beginning are
Yeah.
almost the same. And I was like, no, why is the dark music from Final Fantasy VI also similar to the cheesy music from The Young and the Restless?
Yeah, and even in this setting, even though it is slightly more upbeat, it still has that sense of like something's not right. Like there's something kind of foreboding, something kind of omnipresent and very like monitoring. I don't know the exact words for
Yeah.
it right now, but that's a good call actually, and it's exactly what they're doing here too.
So one of the things that I really like about this piece is that, we've already said all the isolating stuff, but I start to associate these two instruments that we hear, the organ and the piano, with Kefka and Celeste. So at the beginning of the game, we already did your Zarathustra talk, right? So we're getting that same organ back, and we're going to hear that organ again in the final fight, in the final battle with Dancing Mad. And so Celeste is the one, she's got to be our ray of hope now, right? She's the Pandora's box ray of hope instead of Terra at this point. And she's just kind of stumbling through until she can find her friends. And so I like being, not every time, but I like it when you can sometimes map instruments to characters, back to Peter and the Wolf and Steven Universe that we've talked about before. And so I think that's a really interesting composition for those reasons. You can sort of map those characters to, I'm the big powerful one and I'm oppressive over everyone, and Celeste, the piano piece, sort of fallen this way and that way.
Yeah, and that's the other part I was going to bring up, was how there's that piano that also sounds a little bit of a reverb setting on it, and it's very alone. It's very isolated. You hear like one note and then a long gap before some other notes come in. And in my mind, I always hear those notes as if she's literally saying like, "Help, is anyone there? Can someone please help me?" Something along those lines. And then there's these big gaps where she's waiting to hear a response from someone. But
It
unless you
almost
go
even
out,
echoes, right? That line that you just did goes as if someone out there goes, Edgar or Locke goes, I hear you.
yeah,
Da,
exactly.
da,
It's
da,
like
da.
there's this anticipation for a call and response, but it's not there yet, at least.
Oh, that is so very, very cool. I think another one of the reasons I didn't love the trailer, like that wind sound can be hard because it's there the whole time, which I think is thematically good. It would make it so that I would, like, after one time through listening, just like, okay, skip to the next thing. That wind sound in my ear is getting a little tough with all this is so dark and oppressive, which is why I do have a preferred arrangement of it. And I think most people are familiar with Distant Worlds, the big orchestra concerts. I've been lucky enough to go a few times. You've been a couple of times as well, right? Right.
I have. It's fantastic. I sobbed at the first one because I was just so moved by hearing Liberi Fatali in person for the first time.
Yeah. I think they're going to be here on my son's second birthday next year, and they should be performing Final Fantasy 16 music, which I've never heard live before, and so we might make that happen. But something I was very lucky to go to a long time ago, it doesn't tour as much. It's a spin-off series called A New World, where it's very pared down. They refer to it as intimate Final Fantasy concert. The way it was described when we went by Arnie Roth's son, Eric, who Arnie Roth does the Distant World. So his son conducts and helps do, I think, some of the arranging on some of these tracks. It's just one instrument, one person per instrument, right? A very small orchestra to do these pieces. And so I saw them on the campus of DU, Denver University here, which was really, really cool. Like a small theater, very intimate. They don't play all the big, loud Final Fantasy music you're used to. They play stuff like this. Yeah.
I love a good chamber ensemble.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, these folks are great.
That sound, and when you're in the room and it's just so quiet, and it just you walk back outside and you're like, oh man, the world isn't ending. I guess I thought it was. I was convinced in there that we'd come back out and it would just be an empty,
Just a
isolated
waste. Yeah.
wasteland. Yeah, exactly.
So something else on this piece I have to mention before I forget it. Are either of you familiar much with the music of the band Queen beyond just like their kind of big radio hits?
Maybe a
Not
little
really,
bit
no.
beyond, but not much. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this piece they do that wasn't one of their huge hits, but it's one that people who know it tend to really enjoy. It's called "The Show Must Go On," and there's this part that whenever the Dark World theme plays this little melody, I think of the part where Freddie Mercury sings "On and on. Does anybody know what we are living for? The show must go on." And that same little melody, that little da da da, that they also do, and it repeats in this song multiple times as well. And there's something about that little tiny line that just gives you this sense of like distress and hopeful searching in some way, because I hear it in other pieces that have that similar meaning to them, that similar setting of like trying to find hope in a desperate setting. That song in particular, it's about, I think it's primarily about like a heartache he suffered, and he was like, what's the point of going on if I'm so sad? Oh, but the show must go on. I gotta keep, put the smile on and keep being a performer, even though I'm, really struggling inside. And this song, it fits that similar vibe very well, where it's just, I have to continue. I have to keep going.
And the other thing that version does, that you talked about it earlier with Terra's theme, is it builds in the instruments, right? It slowly keeps adding more and more, like in Final Fantasy VI. So we're into spoiler territory here. We talked about you spend the first half of the game putting together this group of heroes to save the world. And then you fail at that and the world is explodified. So then you spend the second half of the game, or really the final third, let's not get into that, doing it again, right? You've got to reassemble the team. So more instruments come back together. And Uematsu does this remarkable storytelling thing of giving us a third, very heroic, final overworld piece of music.
Yeah, and even though it's funny because this is technically not an overworld piece, it's actually an airship theme, but everyone associates it with being an overworld theme. And even in Square Enix's own like search filters, if you search for Final Fantasy VI Overworld 2 theme in some combination, this song still comes up. And so we were discussing this of what songs to discuss on this episode, and I was just like, we can't not, even though it's technically not an overworld theme, it's an overworld theme, and it's the one everyone thinks of as being the World of Ruin overworld.
Right. Once you've reassembled enough of the team and gotten the Falcon, that first time when it kicks up, when there's really hope again, and that's really the moment that we're at in the story, right? Is after everything has been so desolate and awful, and that Dark World song has been playing at us for so long, we get this.
What's happening here? Because this is doing a lot of heavy lifting in one simple song.
It's so good.
Someone's really working that hi-hat, man. We got a hi-hat solo virtuoso going on. There's a
Man.
this is back to a Head on Our Way aspects, realms.
We are hearing a lot of callbacks to Final Fantasy V's overworld theme, Ahead on Our Way. Continue, Ira.
Just that driving percussion that's moving us forward. It's not the same kind of march or even the dirge that we might have had in some of those other ones. We're galloping again. We're gonna make it. And I really I love this piece.
Yeah, right away from the percussion part, the relatively simple melody, and in my opinion, the part that really sells it is the bass part. That really front forward, boom boom, boom boom doom doom. It sounds like it could have been the very next song in Five's soundtrack with the way that it's featured in that kind of combination of stuff. And we're getting back to that setting that we had. We referred to it in an old episode as like Final Fantasy V is a very kind of like camaraderie, kind of punchy in the arm, sort of, friends on an adventure sort of tone for a lot of it. And wouldn't you know it, as we are literally searching for friends, the name of the song, and we're getting our crew back together, we're getting a little bit of that kind of punchy on the arm. I can actually, throw a joke at my friend again, and we're slowly getting our spirits lifted a little more. So if you've played Final Fantasy V, he's inserting this little, like, not explicit seed in your mind to be like, hey, remember how 5 felt when you were like all happy-go-lucky going on your little adventure and chasing down the water dragons and all this kind of stuff? We're getting back to that point now. It's no longer Dark World, no longer foreboding organ music. And he also does a really cool thing where we haven't heard it hardly at all, if at all, to be honest, in 6's soundtrack. He doesn't really do the thing that I've pointed out before, where he'll do this sort of borrowed chord turnaround at the end of the loop to then kind of get us back to the beginning in a way that our ear can kind of lighten up a little bit and go, oh, it's something new. Oh, it's the same thing, but my brain was tricked. This, he finally does it again. He finally goes from what's primarily kind of an A minor, F major, C major sort of in between area. And at the very end, he basically goes into this little melody here. And then and he does that little turnaround, that little bit of a mini modulation, which he doesn't really do in most of 6. And so I think it's kind of interesting how he took one of his own compositional techniques from as far back as 1. Like Final Fantasy 1 does this with the town theme, the overworld theme, and he brought it back here to be like, hey, we're getting back to the good times. It's gonna be good again. Here's how I'm telling you without telling you.
Yeah. One of the great things about making a reference, whether you're making a reference in literature or music, right, is that you're also referencing everything that reference was referencing. Everyone followed that, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, we're grabbing Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy 1, but then that means we're reinvoking Indiana Jones and Neverending Story, and all of those things come back to fuel this just extremely driving, heroic music at the end of Final Fantasy VI. I've always loved this piece, like most people who heard it like for the first time, and it just really meant something to you in that moment. It is one of maybe only 2 pieces on the entire soundtrack that I just prefer the original as it is. There's a very nice orchestral version of it on Distant Worlds. It's fine. Listen to it. It's lovely. I began one of the episodes of our podcast with it. I like it. The Pixel Remaster, I think 95% of the Pixel Remaster soundtrack is now just the definitive versions of these pieces for me. I like them on real instruments. I love everything they did with that. This one piece for me, just as it is, the 16-bit Nintendo, that bass line is one of my favorite bass lines that he ever wrote. Particularly, Ryan, what's happening to me here? What? That's so tasty.
Yeah, just those little bit of slides or bends, depending on how the MIDI instrument did it. But basically,
Right.
yeah, it's
How
just
did
either a fretless bass, glissando, or slide up the neck or something. But just a little tastiness, a little bit of that less structured and, quote unquote classical music ilk to it. And it's just kind of like, hey, we can be a little friendlier, a little bit more chill now. Good things are
Hmm.
going to happen. I do notice that part whenever I hear it, it's like it sticks out to you. It's like, oh, this doesn't sound like anything else. I don't recall hearing glissando bass parts anywhere in this game
Right.
until there. Yeah, so something else this piece does that's really clever, and it's kind of a call forward for something he's going to do in a future soundtrack, a future song, is the very first 4 bars. It's just 4 ascending whole notes. It's just, in the melody part at least, it's just,
Yeah.
and then it jumps into the main melody. And so right there from the get-go with the 16th note hi-hat part, it's giving you this sense of rising action, invigoration, motion happening in some way. And because it's going up, that's going to put in your brain just this subconscious idea of, oh, things are improving, things are going to go higher in some story arc manner, whatever the case may be. And then it just jumps into this very beautiful, almost like consoling melody. I don't really know how to describe this song or
Hmm.
why it just works so well, but it's just like, it just works. It just works for some reason.
All right, before I wrap up with final thoughts on some of this overworld music, since I mentioned it earlier, I did want to play a little bit of a snippet from the Xenogears album Creed from Mayura Briknak and Yasunori Mitsuda. This is the third track titled Balto.
That's tasty. That sounds like a Suikoden song. I can't
Yeah,
remember which one, but it sounds like straight out of Suikoden too.
it absolutely does. I just played Eiyuden Chronicle recently, and it's got all of that sound on purpose. It's basically Suikoden, and yep, 100%, absolutely. That whole album is really good. I highly recommend it.
Funny you say that. Before we get into this piece, because I've had Eiyuden Chronicle on my kind of like watch list for a
Mhm.
while now. How would you describe that game in relation to other JRPGs?
Oh, it's essentially like playing Suikoden again. It's absolutely and purposefully like with the 100 characters that you go and recruit. It's got the similar battle system. It's got the thing where you rebuild your hometown. It's got a stellar soundtrack. It's got fun, sometimes silly, but really fun voice acting. It's got a story that I very much enjoyed. I probably poured about 90 to 95 hours into that game during the early days of my son's life because it's a very easy play. Especially if you're familiar with JRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're on it, I'm giving you one more bonus piece. Can't not do it now.
I was fully prepared to just say like, oh, you can cut this from the actual
Nope.
cut, but if it's something that our listeners might enjoy some Eiyuden Chronicles.
So I wanted to pop in with a quick edit from the future here because I wanted to let everyone know, including myself, that the composer for Eiyuden Chronicle is named Michiko Naruke. And I was pleased to discover that not only did she do some music for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, but she is the composer for the Wild Arms games, which have fantastic music, and I hope we get to talk about her more again in the future.
That sounds delightful. So, okay, I have to ask this or point this out. I can't see the title. I see it like on the screen here, but it's so small that I can't make it out what it says. But I'm going to guess that what this is in Eiyuden Chronicles, it's some sort of scenario where you could see someone say, like, spreading out a map on a table and going, all right, here's the plan. Is that kind of what this is set for?
Yes, it's. I think that's the right idea. So what's interesting is, like I said, like in Suikoden, you get it like a home headquarters, and like in Suikoden, it's absolute tatters when you first get there, and the music is different. It's like this very sad music, and then as you go throughout the game, by the end of the game, it's bombastic and heroic, and there's trumpets and horns everywhere. This is the second one. So this is we are no longer people on the run. We're a little rebel gang with a plan. Someone is laying out a map. Someone is making a decision. We're going to start fighting back. This is the moment in the game where our little ragtag group decides we need to go out into the world and recruit an army and fight back against the Empire.
That's wonderful. I already, just hearing that little snippet alone already makes me want to play this game even more than just my brief little like scant, review that I've been checking for the past couple months has been. That's just delightful. Also, shout out to that really expert like brushes on snare drum percussion part there. Yeah. God, I love a good brush on snare drum part.
I just love that piece. I think it's very, very tasty. So yeah, I figured that would sell it to you better than anything else I could say.
Nice. I do have one thing to wrap up our discussion of the Final Fantasy stuff. Do either of you have any other comments or anything you want to say?
Yeah, my final thought on that was just that, again, it's remarkable. His genius is remarkable to me. Take one more. Because of the way this has evolved. You go back to that first episode we did on Overworld music. The way, he decided it can serve different roles. It can be a character theme. It can change more, right? We went through that today, is the way, now as different things happen in the story, I can make the Overworld music into something else to really sell the stakes and what's going on. That would become kind of normal for the franchise moving forward, right? And then that he could, in so many different ways, paint a landscape, right? All of these are, even when they're character or intro music as well, they're always place music. It's always supposed to be this big encapsulation of the world. And I'm struck by his ability to do that when it's heroic, do it when it's sorrowful, do it when it feels like there's no hope, do it when it feels like hope is returning. These are all different feelings for what is essentially a piece of music that just accompanies you while you walk around on the world map. Right.
Ira?
Yeah, he took my answer. It's gotta tell you where you are and help push you to what needs to happen next.
Yeah, but my final thoughts for these three games in particular, we've heard music from 4, 5, and 6. And for any aspiring music composers out there, use these songs, specifically the ones that we listened to from the games today, as a great example of you don't need to be a master of making a great melody like Uematsu or Beethoven or Mozart or John Williams. You don't have to be a master of that to make great music, because these, aside from, I'd argue, Terra's theme, they don't really have particularly notable melodies. There's something about the other parts of its musical construction that sell what's happening programmatically in the game. Think about using very sparse orchestration versus very full orchestration. Think about using melodies that are very slow and empty versus ones that are very quick and tight and pulled together. Think about using real world things like the sound of wind blowing through a canyon or a desolate land as being an effect that can help sell what you're trying to do otherwise. Using certain instruments like the fife and drum or a church organ to emulate something that from a real world experience you can draw from for your listener to go, oh, that sounds like X. I bet we're going to hear Y in the game or see Y in the game. Use these things, and I highly recommend study these Overworld themes because they do a great job of setting the tone of what's happening or what's changed in the game, even if the melodies themselves were completely cut out and it was just very generic, scales or something, because there's so much more to good composition and good music production than just a great melody. Even though I consider myself a melodist, I love a good melody, I'm a sucker for it, but there's so much more outside of what we call pitch theory that makes good music. Orchestration, arrangement, pacing, tempo changes. These are all things that are frequently overlooked when you look at quote unquote music theory in, capital letters. But look at these songs, analyze them, and figure out why do they sound great, even if the melody itself, and maybe even like the harmony itself, doesn't do a whole lot of unique stuff. There's something else that Uematsu is still doing here that puts you in the game. And these 3 games in particular, I think, is where we really see him. Like I said at the start of the episode, he's kind of goes from Final Fantasy 3, where he found his voice, and then 4, 5, and 6 is where he refines it. And he does so much that goes beyond just your basic pitch theory to say, here's how you make a great grand story in a video game and make music that serves that purpose expertly well.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone who has reached out to us. Feel free to let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned, plus any questions you may have or any piece you would like to hear in the future down in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to Everything is Final Fantasy on Patreon, YouTube, and all social media platforms, especially Blue Sky, and please do the same for Airship Overdrive, Ryan's project, where you can hear arrangements of some of your favorite video game music. Join us next time when we brave Match Tech Research Facility, floating continent.